From the most jacked 19-year-old of all time to the man they called the next Anderson Silva. Here are the most disappointing fighters in UFC history that didn't live up to the hype. To get things started, we have a heavily hyped UFC lightweight who, funnily enough, just signed a deal to rejoin the promotion. Will Kevin Lee be able to deliver on the hype the second time? Well, if one thing is for certain, it's that his first stint with the promotion was a major disappointment. Lee seemed to have all of the key ingredients to become a star. He looked the part, talked the part, and at times we saw that his fighting ability was up to par. He even gave Tony Ferguson one hell of a fight before gassing out. This dude is as athletic as they come. But unfortunately, his inconsistency, his cardio, and his ability to take a shot on the chin saw him lose a few fights in his career. Before he had even turned 30, Lee left the UFC, and while he briefly appeared for Eagle FC, the door was reopened to him, with Dana White opting to give him one more shot. We move to another lightweight who just hasn't managed to fully pull it together. It's damn near impossible not to love Lando Venata's fighting style. Like Kevin Lee, he was another fighter who managed to give Tony Ferguson problems. Lando took a fight on a few days' worth of notice against the third-ranked lightweight in the world. And somehow, someway, he looked amazing, up until he tired himself out and got submitted. But in Fight 2, the hype would hit another level entirely, when Lando scored an insane spinning wheel KO over John McDessie. People were convinced this guy was going somewhere. But in the time since, well sure, Lando always entertains. He really has had a problem winning. Sometimes it would be a narrow decision loss, or he would fall apart when his cardio failed him. A fun fighter, yes. However, he's definitely not the champion some believed him to be. But while Lando's losses kind of flew under the radar, even the casual fans knew exactly who Sage Northcutt was. And when you're that young and you look as shredded as he does, it was clear that Sage was going to be a star. But his status as one of MMA's biggest hype jobs is actually kind of unfortunate. Because even though Sage didn't deliver, his career was very poorly managed. The dude, at 19, was way too young for the UFC. But by the time he left, he still had a record of 6-2, and he was riding a 3-fight win streak. Dana and his team should have offered him a developmental deal or something to give him a slower rise. Unfortunately, as soon as he arrived in his new home at one championship, they made the baffling decision to match him up with Cosmo Alexandre. And he KO'd him so quickly and brutally that Sage fractured 8 bones in his face and was not seen inside the cage for another 4 years. A major what-if in MMA history. For rising talents, sometimes beating a prospect can allow you to take some of their hype on board. But for Mickey Gall, his win over Super Sage didn't exactly lead to great things in his future. Known as the guy who the UFC fed CM Punk to, Mickey Gall then built off of that win by taking out Sage Northcutt in his second UFC outing. Seems like a great start, right? Well, after that, Gall just couldn't find momentum. He went 2-6 for the rest of his career, showing good grappling, yes, but he just lacked the overall skill to really make us believe that he was of UFC caliber. Not all prospects make it, and Mickey certainly didn't build off his early form. One man who climbed far higher up the ladder was England's Darren Till. Is it unfair to call a fighter who fought for UFC gold a disappointment? Well, despite showing greatness in moments, he has every reason to be disappointed with his inability to reach his clear potential. His striking is undeniably good. He was able to go toe-to-toe with Wonderboy, Robert Whittaker, Donald Cerrone, and more. But the dude just has terrible wrestling and grappling. And even when he's fighting on his feet, his ability to up his tempo and pull the trigger is unbearable to watch. After losing back-to-back to Derek Brunson and Dricus du Plessis, Till asked to leave the promotion to focus on other things. A far cry from being pegged as a future welterweight champion. But while thinking that Darren Till was the answer to Tyron Woodley was one thing, believing that Johnny Walker was about to beat John Jones was another thing entirely. This long Brazilian seemed to have the tools to be a real threat. At 6'6", his wide arsenal of knees, elbows, and spinning strikes made him a very unique matchup at 205 pounds. Unfortunately, that wild nature left him open to a lot of damage. And boy did he take some damage. Walker went from highly dangerous prospect to a 1-win and 4 losses stretch. And while sure, he's riding a 2-fight win streak now, the wheels are not yet back on his hype train. Walker was exciting, marketable, and clearly had the company behind him, but at least Dana didn't try to sell us wolf tickets like this next one. Look, we know that Dana White has a talent for saying crazy things, but even by his standards, saying Cynthia Calvillo reminded him of the potential of Conor McGregor and Ronda Rousey was another level of wild entirely. Look, we don't even need to dive too deeply into this one. Cynthia was decent, sure, but nothing about her first 6 or 7 UFC fights made us think she was that special. And yet Dana White tried so hard to sell us, telling the world that he had that McGregor or Rousey kind of feeling about this one. Well, as it turned out, Calvillo was not that good. And she's currently riding a 5-fight streak of losses, which got her cut from the UFC. But for as much as Dana would have loved to see Calvillo succeed, if Paige VanZant was even moderately better at fighting than she actually was, she could have been a real UFC success story. And sure, depending on how you look at it, she is a well-known figure in the mainstream world. But as far as her fighting career is concerned, the UFC very clearly overestimated her abilities. Paige really did seem like the full package. She had the look, the charisma, and some uncoachable toughness in the cage, but as soon as she received her first major step-up in competition, against a young Rose Namajunas, it all came crumbling down. Paige was totally dominated for 5 rounds, relying only on her toughness to get her to round 5. And then eventually, in the dying seconds of the bout, Thug Rose locked in a rear-naked choke for the finish. Paige was shown to be tough, yes, but very, very average otherwise. Toughness is good, but toughness alone doesn't win world titles. And that makes for a pretty hilarious transition to our next entry. Cody Garbrandt is an amazing striker, and nobody can take his UFC title away from him. But the dude's fight IQ and ability to take a punch are shockingly bad. He's a chinny bantamweight who really can't help but slug it out sometimes. It's a terrible combo. Look, his performance against Dominic Cruz was amazing. But once Cody's chin started to fail him, the secret was out, and in 6 fights he lost 5, getting KO'd in 4 of them. He is only 31, but most would agree that he will never have another win quite as good as the Cruz one. Another guy who knows a thing or two about one insanely good night at the office is Uriah Hall. Once seen as the successor to the great Anderson Silva, we watched this guy doing phenomenal work on The Ultimate Fighter, where he scored maybe the single greatest KO in the history of the show. People really had no reason to doubt this dude's hype. He just had that special something, or at least he did until the bright lights of the octagon hit. From there, Uriah Hall struggled for confidence. And I mean, he really struggled. After losing his first 2 UFC fights, Hall would trade wins and losses for the next decade until people totally lost faith in his ability to turn it around. The gold standard when it comes to not delivering on the hype. From the prospects who still might turn it all around, to the ones that have absolutely zero chance. These have been the UFC's most disappointing prospects.